So Justin Fields and his potential role with the Pittsburgh Steelers, there's been a lot of talk about it, this idea of moving him to a different position, specifically wide receiver. It's really sparked a lot of debate.
Yeah, I think the suggestion from Ben Roethlisberger, former Steelers quarterback, has definitely raised eyebrows. I mean, Fields was drafted as a quarterback. He's always played that position.
Right. So why move him now?
Well, I think Roethlisberger's argument, it really centers around this element of surprise. He believes that even the threat of Fields just lining up at receiver, it could force opponents to adjust their defensive strategies and then, in turn, create opportunities for the Steelers elsewhere.
It's a fascinating concept. I mean, are we really talking about just the possibility of him being there?
I think so. I think it's that mere possibility that adds another layer of complexity for the opposing team's defensive coordinator. Do they dedicate significant practice time to defending something that they might never actually see? And, how does that impact their preparation for other aspects of the Steelers' offense?
But how realistic is this? I mean, Fields has made it clear that he's committed to playing quarterback. He even rejected, the idea of returning kicks earlier this season.
Right, and that's certainly a hurdle. It's hard to imagine him embracing a position change at this point in his career, especially when he's so focused on competing for that starting quarterback role.
And you can't ignore the potential impact on his development as a quarterback. I mean, if he's splitting his time between positions, would that hinder his progress?
Yeah, it's a valid concern. I mean, quarterback is such a demanding position, both mentally and physically, that, dividing his attention could be detrimental.
Roethlisberger does acknowledge this tactic would need to be used strategically, deployed in specific situations, not as a regular occurrence. He really believes that element of surprise is key.
But even then, would the potential benefits outweigh the risks? It's a bold idea, but one that requires careful consideration from both the coaching staff and the player.
I think the question we need to ask is, what would the Steelers really gain from this move?
So let's consider that. Roethlisberger used a specific example to illustrate his point. Imagine a seemingly standard play with Fields lined up at receiver. The defense now has to account for multiple possibilities. Is he a decoy? Is he going to run a reverse? Could he even receive a pass?
So that uncertainty could create hesitation in the defense, potentially opening up opportunities for other players. It's like a chess match. You're forcing your opponent to react to a threat that may or may not materialize.
Exactly. But it's crucial to analyze the potential downsides, too.
What do you see as the biggest risks?
Well, first, the time spent preparing for a scenario that might not occur. Is that time better spent on solidifying their core offensive schemes?
And then there's the risk of confusing your own players. If the offense is constantly changing and adapting, could that lead to miscommunication and errors?
It's possible. There's a need for clarity and consistency in offensive play calling, especially for a young quarterback like Kenny Pickett, who's still developing.
Another factor to consider is how opposing defenses might adapt. If this tactic becomes a regular part of the Steelers' game plan, wouldn't defenses eventually adjust and find ways to neutralize it?
Absolutely. The element of surprise diminishes over time. Defensive coordinators are highly skilled at adapting to new offensive schemes. They would likely study film, identify patterns, and develop counter strategies.
So the key would be to use this tactic sparingly and unpredictably to keep the defense guessing.
Precisely. It becomes more about creating a sense of unease in the opposing team, forcing them to account for something that might not even happen. That mental game could potentially be just as valuable as any on-field advantage.
This raises an interesting point. Is this move more about psychological impact than actual on-field production?
It's possible that the true value lies in the disruption it causes, the way it forces the defense to think differently and adjust their approach.
But is that enough to justify such a drastic change for a player like Fields?
That's a question that the Steelers organization needs to answer. They need to weigh the potential benefits against the risks. Considering Fields' development, the team's offensive strategy, and the overall impact on their season, it is an unconventional idea, but it's not totally unprecedented. I mean, we've seen players like Troy Brown, Deion Sanders excel in multiple roles on both offense and defense.
Right. But those were extraordinary athletes. Is it fair to compare Justin Fields to players of that caliber?
I don't think that comparison is about replicating their specific skill sets, but it's more about the concept of positional fluidity. These players demonstrated that a single player can significantly impact a game from multiple positions.
And their versatility was remarkable. They contributed in ways that went beyond traditional positional expectations.
Yeah, and their success really highlights the potential value of having players who can seamlessly transition between roles. It adds an element of unpredictability to the game.
So how do you think this concept of positional fluidity could influence the future of football?
Well, it could potentially lead to a shift in how players are scouted and developed. Instead of solely focusing on specialized skills, there might be a greater emphasis on overall athleticism and adaptability.
So we might see a rise in hybrid players, individuals who excel in multiple areas and can contribute in a variety of ways.
That would certainly make the game more dynamic and challenging.
But wouldn't that also raise concerns about player specialization?
There's definitely a risk that players who try to master multiple positions might not reach the same level of expertise in a single position as someone who focuses solely on that role.
So it's a trade-off between versatility and specialization.
Finding the right balance will be crucial. The ideal scenario is to have players who can excel in a primary role while also possessing the ability to contribute in other areas when needed.
It'll be interesting to see how this concept evolves and whether it becomes a more prominent aspect of the game.
This discussion surrounding Justin Fields and his potential position change, I think it's a sign that the NFL is constantly seeking ways to innovate and evolve.
It challenges traditional notions of how the game is played and opens up new possibilities for strategic thinking.
Whether or not Fields actually makes this transition, it remains to be seen. However, the mere suggestion has sparked a conversation about the potential benefits and challenges of positional fluidity.
So this conversation, it's not just about Justin Fields. It's about the future of football and how the game might adapt to new ideas and approaches.
This whole conversation surrounding Justin Fields, it raises a fundamental question about the evolution of football. Is the game moving towards a future where positional designations become less rigid?
If we are seeing a shift towards this positional fluidity, what would be the driving force behind this change?
Well, the need for adaptability, it's a significant factor as defensive schemes become more complex and offenses seek new ways to gain an advantage. Having players who can contribute in multiple ways becomes increasingly valuable.
So it seems like the traditional view of players specializing in a single position, that might be evolving.
Yeah, the idea of a player solely focusing on one role might become less common. We might see a greater emphasis on developing versatile athletes who can seamlessly transition between positions as needed.
Is there a risk, though, that this emphasis on versatility might come at the expense of, mastering a specific skill?
It's a valid concern. Developing elite-level skills in any position, it requires dedicated focus and repetition. And if a player's attention is divided, it might hinder their ability to reach their full potential in a specific role.
So it's a complex issue with no easy answers. The ideal scenario would be to find that balance between fostering versatility and ensuring that players can still develop specialized expertise.
And I think this discussion about Justin Fields and his potential move to wide receiver, it's a microcosm of this larger debate about the future of football.
It forces us to consider the evolving nature of the game and the strategic implications of positional fluidity.
Whether or not this particular move happens, the conversation itself is significant. It highlights the ongoing search for innovation and the constant push to redefine the boundaries of what's possible in football.
It'll be fascinating to see how this concept of positional fluidity continues to shape the game in the years to come.
This discussion, I think, underscores the importance of strategic thinking and adaptability in a sport that is constantly evolving. As the game changes, so too must the players and the approaches to utilizing their skills.
This situation with Justin Fields and Ben Roethlisberger's suggestion, I think it's provided valuable insights into the potential direction of football.
It's a reminder that the game we see today, it might look very different in the future.
Goodbye, and see you in the next video.